Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's about time I bite the bullet and do this video. King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard have one of the most dense catalogues in music history. They have been active for 13 years up to this point, putting out their first album in 2012, and have released 27 albums. Dear Lord, the output of these guys is nuts. They cover almost every style of rock, from psychedelic to krautrock to prog rock to thrash to prog metal. Folk rock, country, electronic, everything under the sun, King Gizzard has either made an attempt at it or is going to make an attempt at it. Big concept albums, explorations into microtonality. King Gizzard really are one of the most adventurous bands out there, and it's surprising how consistent they are in quality for me. Very rarely do they put out an album that I'm not crazy on, and very rarely do they put out an album that I don't think is at the bare minimum great. Their ability to create such interesting concepts and their ability to explore all of these different genres and subgenres in such depth just makes them such a fascinating band to me and makes their projects so re-listenable for me. So going into this, you're going to see a lot of, high-ranking albums here. You're going to see a lot of them. I really do love this band. And, yeah, with that being said, let's just get started. You already told me to. You said it's alright. You know, for a band that I love as much as I do, they really did not start off on their best foot. 12 Bar Bruise essentially feels like a taste test for the band, if that makes sense. It's their attempt at doing some psychedelic rock, it's their attempt at doing something with a little bit of the conceptual lyricism. Not necessarily this is a concept album, but there's lots of interesting storytelling elements in each of the different songs, and I do feel like the album itself is pretty solid for a debut, but as a holistic album, you can definitely see a lot of the shortcomings of them, doing it for the first time. The production is very weak. The performances are pretty hit and miss. It just feels like the band didn't really have all that much figured out at this point, and you can definitely see some of the growing pains here. It's not a bad album by any means. I think it's okay, but this is easily one of their weakest projects. I would easily slap 12 Bar Bruise in the C tier. Eyes Like the Sky is such a weird fucking album, dude. This project is a Western story being told through spoken word country songs. I of course have to mention that Ambrose's dad is the writer of the album, as well as providing all of the spoken word vocals. King Gizzard are essentially just providing the backing instrumentals for this album. And I have to say, the results aren't all that interesting. The instrumentals get bland as fuck by the time you get to the halfway point of the album. And the story being told here just lacks any sense of wonder, any sense of urgency. It just feels like shit standard background Western elements, if that makes sense. Production is still not the strongest. The pacing of the album is so sloppy, despite it only being 27 minutes. It's, again, not a bad album by any means, but easily the weakest of the King Gizzard discography for me. Quality-wise, it would be a C tier, but as a King Gizzard album, I'm going to put it in the D tier. Float along, fill your lungs. Now we're on to the good shit. This is such a huge step up from the previous two. This album is an insane leap in quality. Not only does it do such a great job at setting the blueprint of where the band would go moving forward, it's just a great standalone album as is. It's insanely ambitious, particularly in it having the first long song that the band made with Head on Pill. It's so well produced, man. It really feels like they nailed the lo-fi production aesthetic that they would go on to have with all of their early to mid 2010s psychedelic albums. And not only that, the songs themselves are just such a massive step up. Head on Pill, God Is Calling Me Back Home, the title track, which is also the closer. All of these songs just see the band flourishing creatively. It sees them absolutely mastering their psychedelic sound. And honestly, this just feels like the first proper King Gizzard album. I would easily chuck this one up in the A tier. I really respect Oddments as an album. This sees the band going into a more experimental direction, kind of playing around with their sound, seeing how much they can get out of the psychedelic elements that they have. It feels like the band trying to transcend just being a shit standard 60s throwback psychedelic rock band. It feels like they really wanted to carve out their own distinct niche with this album, and I think they do that at parts, but there are also some rocky moments on this project. Stressin', Vegemite, and Hot Wax all feel like the band kind of stumbling towards the finish line, not really able to find their footing at any point on the songs. And they're kind of telling of how the band weren't really able to expand upon their sound in the most creative way possible here. Now, I do think the majority of this album is pretty good, particularly Work This Time and Homeless Man in Adidas. Like, those songs are absolutely fantastic, on par with a lot of the best moments on Float Along, Fill Your Lungs. But in terms of pacing, in terms of songwriting, in terms of album cohesion, this project just feels a little too scattershot, it feels a little too random and a little too undercooked. And for me, it evens out at around the B tier. It would be a very low B tier though. If Float Along Fill Your Lungs was the first proper King Gizzard album, this is the first must-hear King Gizzard album. I'm In Your Mind, Fuzz is an absolutely insane project. This is a disgusting, acidic, psychedelic trip of an album. All of these songs flow into each other perfectly. There's lots of repeated motifs throughout the album. A lot of the songs even feeling completely identical to each other. But it all just serves to this hypnotic, entrancing feeling that this album gives you. It feels like taking a lightning fast trip through hell, seeing all of this disturbing, crazy imagery that you can't quite wrap your head around, but you still get such a distinct tone out of it. Songs like I'm In Your Mind, Cellophane, and Am I in Heaven are absolutely ginormous, expansive, explosive tracks that really feel like they could melt your face off if you're playing them through some loud enough speakers. But then you also get tracks like Hot Water that are able to slow it down and provide something a little more intimate while still being, again, psychedelic and trippy and hypnotic. This album does not falter for a single second, and this is the first moment where you really get to see why King Gizzard are one of the greatest modern bands going. Mind Fuzz easily goes in the S tier for me. First S tier King Gizzard album, and certainly not the last. Quarters kind of feels like a tester for what they go on to do on Laminated Denim and Made in Timeland, where it's multiple tracks that are all the exact same length. Where Denim and Timeland are two 15-minute tracks making up a 30-minute album, this is four 10-minute, 10-second tracks making up a 40-minute, 40-second album. This album's a funny one for me because while I think all the songs here are great, there are pretty obvious ways that they could be better. It kind of feels like The River is like the perfect length for what it is, but then the band had the idea to make all the songs the same length, and a lot of them feel like they're being stretched out to be, you know, fitting into that time slot. There's certain parts of the album that feel like filler, there's little bits and pieces of this album that feel like they're kind of just thrown in just for the sake of padding runtime, and it certainly loses its balance at points for sure. But as I said, this is a great album still. These songs are still able to be fantastic, attention-grabbing prog rock statements. I mean, all of these songs see the band exploring more, again, progressive elements added on top of the psychedelic elements, and doing it pretty damn well for their first, I guess, prog album. The writing is still solid as always here. It feels like the performances are really locked in on this one. And it feels like the band take a little bit of a step away from the hypnotic and try and do something more expansive here, and I think they pull that off wonderfully. The songs are epic, sweeping, they are able to keep your attention the entire way throughout, and I find this album to be just such an easy listen, if that makes sense. It's a very replayable project that you can kind of just easily get lost in as these tracks flow into each other. I would chuck this one solidly in the A tier. Paper Mache Dream Balloon is cute, fun, sweet, but not quite great. The songs are catchy, quick, breezy, they don't take up too much of your time, But there's nothing really all that mind-blowing or interesting about this project. It just feels like the band having an okay attempt at some folk rock. The original score I gave this album was actually an 8 out of 10, but now that's shrunk to be a low 7 because every time I return to it, I just find myself being interested and enjoying it less and less and less. That being said though, Trapdoor is absolutely one of the best songs in the band's early discography. That song is so catchy, so replayable, so fun, and the flute section on that song is so fun. The woodwind across this album is really fucking creative. I love that they implemented that, and I wish they'd do it more. A fucking far cry from the band's best album, but an okay enough attempt at folk, and certainly better than the last time they tried to do something country related. I would give this album a B tier. Nonagon Infinity is the King Gizzard album. This is the one everyone knows, this is the one everyone says is their favorite, and this was also my first King Gizzard album. It's kind of crazy that it's been over a year since I listened to this thing for the first time. It was April 21st that I got sent this in on stream. Of last year, and I still love it to this day. The concept here is about as creative as I feel like they could have gotten with this sound that they have, this super fast-paced psych rock, where, again, it's a band being trapped in hell, being forced to play the same concert over and over and over and over again, with not only the songs transitioning into each other, but the album transitioning into itself. This thing loops. There are so many different track lists that people have for this thing, different places to start. I personally think that Robot Stop is the perfect place to start, but other people's interpretations are just as good. You can't really have it loop when listening on Spotify or any streaming services, and obviously not if you have it on CD or vinyl, but I'm pretty sure there's a website out there that allows you to listen to the album and have it loop back from the start perfectly, and essentially have it be an endless experience that you can just kind of stop wherever you want and not have just the album itself, if that makes sense. I also find it funny that despite the fact that this album is non-stop insane energy, like seriously, it's just pedal to the metal all the way through, it feels like a perfect sleep album because the lo-fi production here is so soft, everything is so fuzzy, it kind of feels like you could just throw this on in the background while falling asleep, and again, because it's looping over and over again, you just kind of get lost in it, and it'd be so easy to drift off. God, the songwriting here is so fucking good as well. The structures of these tracks are absolutely insane, particularly a track like, again, Gamma Knife, Mr. B, Evil Death Roll. It feels like them taking everything that has worked on all of the previous albums, besides maybe Paper Mache, Dream Balloon, and Eyes Like the Sky, and applying it to create their first true masterpiece. If you don't count Mind Fuzz as a masterpiece, I think Mind Fuzz is a masterpiece. Yeah, this is like the easiest of the two S tiers we've had so far. This is like top of S tier as of right now. This album is a genuine masterpiece, one of the best rock albums of the 2010s. After a surprisingly long year break in between albums, King Gizzard returned with Flying Microtonal Banana. One of the band's most iconic songs, of course, opens up this album with Rattlesnake. I know so many people who hate that song because of how repetitive it is. I love it. The song just has such a trance-like quality to it in its constant repetition, its 7-minute runtime. It really is able to just lock you into this feeling of kind of descending into this nuclear wasteland. And of course, I have to talk about the fact that this is the band's first dive into microtonal music, and they basically perfect it on the first album that they try it. There's something so foreign about the sounds that they're able to create here. It feels like being sent off to an alien planet and just exploring this massive, like, deserted city or something like that that's just covered in nuclear waste. There's just something so off and almost haunting about it. And it's just able to create an experience that you're not really able to get out of any other King Gizzard album, even the 2 other microtonal albums that they'd create down the line. I think the one thing that holds this album back a little bit for me is some pacing issues. Some of these songs definitely do overstay their welcome, and I feel like this album could have maybe been a couple minutes shorter with some of the tracks being cut down. But I don't know, man, the aesthetic of this album never really wears off on me, no matter how many times I return to this thing, and microtonal music is one of my favorite experiments that the band have taken up to this point, and I'd like to see him do it again beyond just KG and LW further down the line. Despite the pacing issues, this album lands itself at the top of A tier for me. Damn near S tier. If it was just a little bit tighter, it would have made it up to S tier.
I think I see an altered beast by the creek.
Murder of the Universe is the band's most ambitious album to date. It is 50% spoken word, 50% garage rock, prog rock, disgusting nightmare fuel mess. It is a 3-part concept album, with the first part talking about the altered beast, like rising up from the ground and fucking everybody up. The second part is about the Lord of Lightning versus the Balrog and their epic battle. And then the final part is about a robot that destroys the world and then covers the universe in vomit. That, like, storytelling doesn't get better than that, let's be honest. This thing is 21 tracks and only 46 minutes. This album moves at a breakneck pace. It never slows down. It never stops. Even in between the different parts of the album, it really feels like they flow into each other perfectly, even if the last and first songs don't transition. I will say the spoken word bits can get a little bit cheesy at points. It does feel like they do kind of fuck with the pacing of the album a little bit. But for the most part, I do feel like they serve the story really damn well and elevate this thing to be a little bit more grand than it would be without them. I will say the amount of tracks on the album do make it kind of a daunting listen at points for me, and it's far from the band's most replayable album, but I still feel like every time I do return to this thing, I find a little bit more to appreciate about it, and I do feel like it could maybe grow to be like a consistent rotation one for me in the future. This one lands itself in the A tier, man. King Gizzard were just on a hot streak in the mid-2010s, dude. Sketches of Brunswick East is the band's first dive into jazz rock, and it's very forgettable. Despite the fact that this album is a collaboration with Mild High Club, it really does feel like it stays so safely in the King Gizzard wheelhouse. Now, the King Gizzard wheelhouse isn't necessarily bad, but I really wish they expanded and explored a little bit more with this one, especially having another fucking band helping them with the album. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of highlights on this album. The Spider and Me, Sketches of Brunswick East 2, and The Book. And I don't think any bad songs land on this album either, but it's just, for the most part, I don't remember much about this album. It's not a listen that stuck with me in the slightest. And again, that's because they didn't really do any exploration here. It's because they didn't really try to expand upon any of the ideas present on the previous albums. It just felt like them slipping in a little bit of jazz rock to try and make this album stand out, and I don't think it did. It's good, it's enjoyable, but it's a far cry from great. This one is a B tier for me.
I see through the bricks to the sea, crumbling castle.
Polygondwanaland is easily my favorite of the 2017 5 albums project. It is a retro, futuristic hellscape that feels prehistoric as well as incredibly forward-thinking. This album is just kind of like a mashup of a bunch of different tones to create something sweeping in scale. You got one of the best album openers in the band's entire discography with Crumbling Castle, one of the best closers in their discography with The Fourth Color, and not only that, the world building on this album is absolutely incredible. From talking about dinosaurs roaming around, there being a castle in the sky. It's able to feel so deserted yet so lived in at the same time, dude. This album really does feel like the band creating their most detailed sonic environment to date. I also have to compliment the pacing here. Dear lord, this album flows absolutely gorgeously, even with Crumbling Castle being such a long track. It feels like that song is just a great taster for what's to come, and then everything just transitions perfectly all the way throughout. So yeah, great world building, incredible blending of tones, and some of the best pacing we've had from the band up to this point lands this thing easily at the S tier, right behind Nonagon for me.
You got gaps, synapses, I'm connected to the network.
Gumboot Soup is a fascinating project for me. It's essentially just an amalgamation of the previous 4 albums from the 2017 5 albums project. Kind of just working in some leftover songs that didn't make it onto those projects and kind of just serving you, I guess, this smorgasbord of a bunch of different styles and tones. But you can kind of tell why a lot of these songs were left off of those albums. This album does not even come close to reaching the heights that any of the other ones do, except for Sketches, which I think this album is a little bit better than. I do think this album is good. Again, these songs are being left off of pretty great albums, and I don't think they're massive steps down or anything like that. And I will say it was very fun when going through this album to try and pick apart which songs landed on which album and kind of, you know, keeping a tally of which ones I got right and wrong. But yeah, the inconsistent nature of this project really does make it feel so you know, scattershot. Feels like it's constantly going back and forth and back and forth. There is so much tonal whiplash. But the songs are enjoyable and memorable enough for me to say this is still a good album, even better than Sketches in my opinion. I would put this one in the B tier. The band took a much-deserved break from recording any new music in 2018 and returned in 2019 with Fishing for Fishies. This album, similar to Gumboot Soup, feels like an amalgamation of a bunch of different sounds, only it's more consistent and more streamlined through a very clear concept. This is the first album the band made that is distinctly and overtly about climate change, which is obviously a theme that they will go on to tackle on many, many albums going forward. Fishing for Fishies, the Bird Song, Plastic Boogie, this album is very clearly about the environment and animals, and kind of the protection of environment and animals. I think the thing that makes this a lot stronger than Gumboot Soup is, again, the fact that this is so much more consistent, and it feels like all of these different sounds they implement, from electronic rock to folk rock to more blues and roots rock, all kind of feel like they are trying to serve this one particular narrative. Not only are they all tonally much more similar to each other, the actual placement of all of these songs makes perfect sense, and the flow of this album is pretty damn impressive as well. I will say the album does shoot itself in the foot a little bit, starting with Fishing for Fishies, as that's one of the best songs in the band's entire catalogue, and the rest of the album never really quite reaches that height. But still, every song on this project is at the bare minimum great, and this is also one of the most memorable albums in the band's catalogue up to this point, and a surprisingly great gaming album. I remember the first time I re-listened to it, I was listening to it while playing Fortnite, and it made it grow on me a ton. This is a great album, but it doesn't quite reach the S tier for me. It's towards the top of the A tier.
There is no planet B.
Fishing for Fishies was part one of a two-part project. The follow-up to it was Infest the Rat's Nest. This is the band's first dive into metal music, and it is the perfect juxtaposition to the previous album. Where the last album was so saturated, it was so colorful, all of these songs felt so expansive and vibrant. This project is bleak, it's disgusting, and it is loud as hell. It feels like them doing their own lo-fi version of a Metallica album, and I absolutely love it. It can get a bit repetitive at times. Some of the riffs, a lot of the drum beats do feel a little bit samey, particularly moving into the back half, but I can't really complain when they are able to capture such a distinct aesthetic and tone and execute it as perfectly as they do. The concept on this album is one of my favorites on any album that King Gizzard have put out. It's about this group of people that try to escape Earth because the planet's being destroyed for environmental reasons. The climate has caused there to be absolutely insane cataclysmic weather events, these insane diseases that are able to wipe out most of humanity. So these people fly off into space, try and go to another planet, only to get there, realize that they brought the disease with them, they all die, go to hell, and then they slaughter the rich people who get to live on Mars freely. They're sent back to kill the rich, to infest the rat's nest. So this album is not only able to be a great commentary on climate change, but it's also a commentary on class, talking about how the poor are being left to die on Earth while the rich get to go and live the rest of their lives on Mars, only for them to then come back and slaughter all the rich people. Now that is immaculate aim. Again, I do wish the album's sound was maybe expanded upon a little bit. I do feel like the songs do get a little bit repetitive and kind of all blend together moving into the back half. But as is, I still think this is a great album and a fantastic first dive into metal for the band. I would easily slap this bitch into the A tier. Easy.
You're in the last migration. It's fun, fuck the system. Your new best rate is great.
I'm going to group these two together, KG and LW, because I feel basically the exact same about these two albums, and I'm going to keep it brief. Both of these albums are great, fantastic follow-ups to Flying Microtonal Banana, and are obviously parts 2 and 3 of their Microtonal trilogy of albums. But I don't know, man, I just don't see myself returning to them all that much outside of a handful of tracks, particularly Automation, which is one of my favorite King Gizzard songs. Despite the fact that I think these are great albums in terms of quality, in terms of personal connection, I just don't see myself all that motivated to really return to either of these projects. And I both see them as like essentially the same album despite being released a year apart. Despite the fact that I give them both 8 out of 10s, I'd put them both in the B tier and not the A tier because I feel like while they're still great albums, I just never really have the motivation to ever return to them. Butterfly 3000 is King Gizzard's pop album, ladies and gentlemen. That's right, after 2 Microtonal albums in 2020 and 2021, they returned and made a pop project. And I will say this album has 3 absolute heaters on it, with Yours, 2.02 Kill a Year, and particularly Catching Smoke, which has grown to be one of my favorites from the band in general. I could kind of take or leave everything else, though. I feel like the album, outside of those 3 tracks, has a mix of some good songs, but for the most part, very, very forgettable moments that really drag. It's only a 43-minute album, but listening to it feels like it's longer than an hour, because these songs just go on and on and on sometimes, dude. I will say, I do appreciate the more optimistic feeling that this album has. Again, with the context of Stu having had his first child, he wanted to create something more optimistic, more joyful, more colorful, to kind of express how happy he was feeling about that. But fuck me, does it make for some of the band's least interesting moments, particularly tracks like Blue Morpho and Your Love. Despite the fact that I would say the album's good, I'd still throw it in the C tier in terms of the King Gizzard discography, because it feels like it's criminally uninteresting for how good the band are at exploring a bunch of different sounds. I feel like they could make a pop album better than this.
Smoke and mirrors, steering clear, watch you tear up interior.
Speaking of criminally uninteresting, Jesus Christ, ladies and gentlemen, we got Made in Timeland. I'm going to be super brief about this one because this album is essentially just the band taking background music for like intermissions in their live shows and turning it into 2 15-minute tracks. But Laminated Denim is just infinitely superior, dude. Like, this album is uninteresting instrumentally. The fucking rapping that they throw in here is so bad. And I also don't remember, like, basically anything on this album besides the rapping. That's all I can remember about it, dude. Fucking C-tier, forgettable ass album. Just listen to Laminated Denim if you want a more ambitious project like this with song lengths.
Drip, drip from the tap, don't slip. Drip, drip from the tap, don't slip. Drip, drip from the tap, don't slip.
Clocking in at an hour and 20 minutes, Omnium Gatherum is the band's most ambitious project, and it's not even close. This album is kind of similar to Gumboot Soup, with it being a bunch of different styles thrown into one. You get some more electronic-based tracks, some progressive tracks, some metal tracks, and I feel like it kind of has some of the shortcomings of Gumboot Soup as well, where the album just doesn't feel all that consistent. I will say the quality of the songs here is absolutely fantastic, though. I mean, the Dripping Tap, strong contender for best album opener in the band's entire discography. Magenta Mountain as well is an incredibly colorful, vibrant follow-up to that track, as well as Predator X being such a great dive into progressive metal for the band, and would obviously tease what they'd go on to do on PetroDragonic Apocalypse, as well as a handful of other incredible tracks in here as well. But you also get songs like Sadie Sorceress and the Grim Reaper that are, oh my god, the rapping, just kill me whenever the rapping starts appearing on this album, dude. As a collection of experiments, I think this album does work a decent bit better than Gumboot Soup, but man, the pacing is just so taxing when trying to listen to this thing. And I also do not think the album needed as many tracks as it does. It feels like a lot of these could have just been left on the cutting room floor. It's a B tier. It's a very good album, but it's certainly not great. I feel like there's just a few too many shortcomings that hold this back from being up there with, you know, all of these incredible albums. Ice Death Planets is one of the band's most interesting experiments, with them going through the 7 different musical modes for all 7 of the tracks on here. Could I tell you the 7 musical modes? No, I could not, because I don't know much music theory. But that doesn't mean I don't notice how distinct each and every one of these songs are, feeling so tonally separated from one another. Like, Mycelium into Ice 5 alone is enough to make me see that, you know, the band doing this is clearly to try and create an album that's as tonally varied as possible. And I don't feel like it ever really gets gets inconsistent, if that makes sense. All of these songs still feel like they do complement each other, despite being so drastically different from one another. This is easily one of the smoothest albums in the band's discography, with everything kind of feeling so relaxing, so soothing. This feels like it would be one of the best sleep albums that King Gizzard have put out for me, easily. This is, of course, an album created from a lot of jamming from the band, and I will say, while not every single part of this project feels quite as loose and as free as others, that jamming does create for some of the most fun and creative parts that each member of the band have, ever played, and also it gives the album such a free-form feeling. It makes everything feel so improvised, because a lot of it was. This is the first S tier that King Gizzard put out in the 2020s for me. Absolutely incredible shit right here. Laminated Denim used to be my favorite King Gizzard album, but one has beaten it, which we will be getting onto soon. But yeah, this album is 30 minutes of the smoothest, most infectious instrumentals you will ever hear. I think both of the songs on this album are 10s for me, and the only reason it doesn't get a 10 is because I just wish there was more. It feels like only having 2 tracks is a little bit detrimental to this project, and I feel like having even just one more, or preferably 2 more to make it an hour-long project, would be able to bring this thing up to being perfect for me. This is the band at their most epic, it's the band at their most distinct visually in terms of the sonic environments they create, and it feels like a perfection of the formula they were doing on Quarters and obviously Made in Timeland. The title of this is an anagram of Made in Timeland as well. 2 15-minute tracks back to back, creating one on-the-dot 30-minute experience, and it feels like neither of the songs are just 15 minutes for the sake of it. 15 minutes feels like the length that these songs need to be as great as they are. Hypertension stands as a strong contender for my favorite song in the band's discography, if not its second to Dragon on PetroDragonic Apocalypse. And The Land Before Timeland is easily one of the most trippy, creepy, but also at points delightful and uplifting songs that the band have ever put out. Again, a lot of jamming on this one that create very free-form feeling tracks, very loose instrumentals that allow the band to just kind of open up and get very creative with the parts they're playing. And that freedom is what makes this album so replayable for me. It's 30 minutes of musical improvisation from people who are just S tier at their instruments. This goes at the top of S tier for me so far. One album will top it, but as of right now, it's the top of S tier.
What it feels like is it feels like it's dreamlike.
You know how I was talking about it feels like they could make a better pop album than Butterfly 3000 down the road? They did. Changes sees them taking the brighter, more poppy sounds of Butterfly 3000 and working in some extra added subgenres to kind of flesh it out. Particularly psych pop and jazz pop, but they also work in a little bit of prog in here as well to give the album a little bit more of that expansive feeling that King Gizzard usually has. This feels like one of the most fun projects that they've created. It just feels like the band's sitting down and creating some silly ass songs that no one's taking all that seriously. They're just kind of trying to make the most enjoyable and casual background album that they have made, and I feel like they actually succeeded in that. I do think some of the songs suffer a little bit from that though. AstroTurf and Exploding Suns are nowhere near as interesting as any of the other tracks on the album, despite still being okay. But then you've got songs on here like Change and Gandhi, which stand as some of the biggest highlights of their discography in the 2020s up to this point to kind of balance that out. I think the biggest thing that holds it from being S tier for me is that I wish there was just a little bit more to this album. We only got 7 tracks, and despite the fact that it's 40 minutes and the songs can be decently long, I wish there was maybe just a handful more songs to kind of just flesh everything out a little bit more. But as is, it still goes in the A tier. If Nonagon Infinity was the band's opus of the 2010s, this is their opus of the 2020s. This album sees King Gizzard taking the progressive elements of albums like Laminated Denim and Quarters and Flying Microtonal Banana and fusing it with thrash. They made a progressive thrash album, and it's the best album in their discography for me. This thing is literal fire front to back. They are firing on all cylinders throughout this. Massive, chunky riffs, the best drumming that Michael Kavanagh has ever put on any songs. Almost an expansion and retelling of the concept that was present on Fishing for Fishies and Infest the Rat's Nest, with it being about the world again going into an apocalyptic state because of the abuse of the environment, until these witches summon this big dragon that essentially just destroys everything as punishment towards us humans for being so harmful to our Earth. The imagery is so bold and vivid here. Everything has so much saturation and color. And while I feel like maybe the album can maybe get a bit texturally samey, they make up for that with some of the best lyrics on any of their albums. Particularly on Dragon. Dragon is easily the best written song that King Gizzard have ever put out, and I don't think they can ever really top it. Again, the imagery is just so distinct. The flavor of this track is so varied, going in and out of these big chugging, almost Motorhead sounding sections into these more percussive breakdowns that feel like a Tool song, and even parts so blaring it feels like it matches the most intense moments on like a System of a Down song. Everything here feels like the band trying to create the most disgusting, distorted version of themselves possible, and they succeed every single second. I could blabber on and on and on and on about this album for days, but as of right now, I'm just gonna say top of S tier, best King Gizzard album in my opinion, and if they ever make one better than it, that album will be a 10. In my top 10 of the 2020s so far, by the way, this album is an actual fucking masterpiece. The Silver Chord is essentially PDA's counterpart, with it telling the exact same story, having essentially the exact same track list but just with different songs, and it is more electronic focused. Tons of lyrical callbacks to PDA, tons of, again, overlapping themes, and again, essentially telling the same story, just in a weaker package. You get two versions of this album when you listen to it. You get the shorter songs version, and you get the extended mixes, which are all like 10 to 20 minute versions of these like 4-5 minute tracks. And neither of them feel all that great. It feels like the band could have found a middle ground between the two, but instead you get versions that are too brief and versions that are way too long. Now I will say the first 3 tracks of the extended mix, Thea, The Silver Chord, and Set, are all absolutely incredible, truly hypnotic songs that I feel like I could get lost in and just play on repeat infinitely. But then the remaining 4 songs are varying shades of okay, but not all that interesting or even memorable in the slightest to me. It really feels like the band wanted to retell the same story as they did on PDA, but in a more accessible package. And ironically, I think they ended up creating something that is way harder to find an into and way harder to casually enjoy than that album. They do electronic music nicely here. I think the synthetic elements do actually go hard, and it feels like every band member was able to surprisingly provide something pretty important, despite the fact that this is obviously not in their wheelhouse in the slightest. So for that reason, it does still get a B tier. It's still good, but as a follow-up to PDA and as a retelling of PDA, it's night and day, not even the same level of quality.
What does the sunlight feel like on your skin? Does it smell like the sound of a pill kicking in?
Flight B741 was the first album that I was able to experience dropping as a King Gizzard fan. And it's a pretty great album to experience the release of for the first time for me. This album essentially sees the band taking it to some old school, bluesy, boogie-woogie rock and roll. Lots of live recordings on this one, lots of big group vocals, and a very hard emphasis on this being a very raw project. Now the band do work in some more progressive and psychedelic elements throughout this, of course, lots of switching time signatures and stuff like that, but for the most part it really does feel like them trying to capture the spirit of old rock and roll music. And I think they do it well. There's some great bluesy bangers on here, particularly a song like Le Risk, Hog Calling Contest, Raw Feel. The band's catchiest moments land on this album, but I think the only complaint I have about it is it's very front-loaded. They are cruising on high, firing on all cylinders up until Le Risk, but then you get to Flight B741 and beyond, and it feels like all of those tracks, while still being solid, are nowhere near as memorable and nowhere near as catchy as the previous tracks. It feels like the charm wears a tiny bit thin, and while I do still think 3 of those 4 songs are pretty great, I will say they're nowhere near as replayable for me as the first half of the album. But still, catchy, explosive bangers, plenty of replayable moments on the album, one of the most replayable albums in general that the band have put out, easily land this thing in the A tier. Phantom Island, the follow-up to Flight B741, where the band took a bunch of leftover tracks from that album and worked in some orchestral elements over it. This album is really good, but it is not great. It feels like the band don't really utilize the orchestra all that much outside of a handful of tracks, the title track, Dead Stick, and then Grow Wings and Fly. It feels like for the most part, the orchestra was kind of just thrown in there as the band being like, yeah, we have some leftover songs, we might as well try it out to see if we can, you know, do it and then improve it on a later album. And you know what, for the most part, it's a successful experiment. Again, Phantom Island, Dead Stick, Grow Wings and Fly, and also Eternal Return live up and honestly kind of exceed a lot of the best moments on Flight B741. Those tracks are able to range from emotional to insanely powerful in their progressions to also just being big, almost like funky, infectious bangers. But then you get that 3-track run of Panpsych, Space Sick, and Aerodynamic that absolutely kills the momentum of this album. It feels like them just making the same song 3 times in a row, 4 times if you include Sea of Doubt. But Sea of Doubt is a pretty big step up because it does feel like the orchestra is utilized in a little bit more of a creative way, and I find that song to be way more memorable than the past 3. I do feel like the pacing falters a little bit as well. A lot of these songs really overstay their welcome, and this album honestly could have been like 10 minutes shorter than it was. I feel like it would have worked way better as like a 35-minute album instead of 45. But still, the positives do far outweigh the negatives, and I certainly would still say this is a really good album. I just hope they expand on this orchestral sound moving forward and give us a really great orchestral rock album at some point in the future. I'd put this solidly in the B tier. Alright, let's rank the album's worst to best, ladies and gentlemen. Coming in last place for me would be Eyes Like the Sky, obviously the only one to make it in D tier. Then I am going to go 12 Bar Bruise at the bottom of C, and then I will have Butterfly 3000 just above Made in Timeland. From there we will go Oddments, bottom of B, then we'll say Paper Mache, followed by Sketches, then Gumboot Soup, and then the Silver Chord. And then from there I think I'll keep it as is, Phantom Island, Omnium Gatherum, and then KG and LW. These two are interchangeable, they're around the same for me. From there we'll go Float Along, Fill Your Lungs, followed by Changes, followed by Rat's Nest. And we'll go Quarters just beneath Murder of the Universe, and then I think I'll keep it like that, B741 into Fishing for Fishies, into Flying Microtonal Banana. From there, this honestly looks like how I'd keep this, to be honest. Yeah, Ice Death Planets, Mind Fuzz, Polygon, Nonagon Infinity, Laminated Denim, and PetroDragonic. Yeah, we already got the S tier in the right order, ladies and gentlemen. So, that is every King Gizzard album put on a tier list and then ranked worst to best. All 27 of them. I've been recording for an hour and 20 minutes up to this point. My voice is gone. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Let me know how you'd rank all of these albums if you've heard them all, and if not, just the ones you've heard down in the comments. Let me know what you think of King Gizzard down below as well. Are you like me and find them to be one of the best modern rock bands going, or do you see them as overrated like a lot of people in my YouTube chat seem to? You can check out my reactions to every single one of these albums in a playlist that will be shown in a card somewhere around here. Yeah, like and sub if you haven't. We are on our way to 3K, and I will see you all whenever I next stream or upload. Bye bye.